Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I would say long time no see, but if all goes well, you will have seen me yesterday. If anyone actually sees this. And if you are seeing this, thank you so much. I'm so excited. I'm just getting started with this channel here. And I'm excited for what's to come. Mainly going to be media reviews. Now we're here to talk about the great contraception debate with Amy and Johnny. I see so many people, because again, love to watch reviewers. To name a few: Regular Guys Random Thoughts, Queen E, Roxy Says, Human No Resource. Super fun people that all review Love is Blind, as well as other pop culture topics and shows. With those reviewers and some other like clips and different people I've seen talking about it, so many people seem confused about the whole debate that Amy and Johnny are having, because everyone's like, okay, why is it vasectomy versus birth control? Why isn't there an option for using condoms? Obviously, I'm not a doctor. I need all of this to be clear. I'm not a doctor. Ask your doctor. Do your research. As I understand it, right? Amy in this clip, and I don't know if people just like missed it because it was like a little brief thing, or they just forgotten, or they just think like it's not valid. But Amy in her direct-to-camera interview says Johnny thinks condoms aren't enough. And a lot of people might be like, oh, that's a lie, that's a cover, he just doesn't want to wrap it up, so he wants some other method, right? Maybe, who knows? We haven't seen all the footage, nor are we either of them. So maybe that's really the tea behind it, and that it's actually not a valid debate. But barring that, throwing that in the trash can and using it to have an important conversation about contraceptive options, I think it's a fair fear. And I know people who double up, who are on birth control and also use protection every time because they don't want any chance of having a kid before they're ready. For some, having a kid at all. So, different strokes for different folks. I get it, because when you look at all of the stats for when it comes to condoms, when it comes to any type of protection that requires some type of human action, like the pill, even the patch, like if you have any user error, the percentage of effectiveness goes down. So when you're looking at these stats, condoms are 98% effective, right? That means it's only 98% effective if you use it perfect all of the time, right? If there's any human error introduced into it, they're less effective, right? And even with that, that's 2 in every 100 people get oopsie pregnant. In Johnny's mind, that might be a lot, especially when you scale up. When the sample size is more than 100, you know what I mean? You can get into the thousands, you can even get into the million, Yeah, you could get into the millions. Math is my strong suit, guys. Anyway, so remember that those stats rely on perfect usage, right? That is the great thing about IUDs, hormonal or non-hormonal. And also the implant. The Nexplanon, I believe, is like the most popular one. They're in there. You get a procedure and they're in there, and there's no human, oh, you have to take a pill, or you have to remember, or if the condom's a bit old, or whatever things happen, that then people are like, oops, you have a baby now. Which is like, children are beautiful and they're a gift, but for some people, or in the timings or the dynamics they're in, it can be bad news. Like, let's be honest. It's not always good news, even though I do believe children are a blessing. And even if it's not when you were ready, you can get ready and it can be a beautiful thing. But I've also seen it not be a beautiful thing for people. So let's just keep it real. So getting back to the issue, right? With a vasectomy, it's not really intended to be reversible. Yes, it is reversible, but the longer you have it, the less reversible it is. So that's something to note, right? I believe Johnny's timeline for his financial goals for having kids were about 5 years. At 5 years, having a vasectomy for that long, your chances of having it reversed drop. So in terms of ensuring his long-term fertility, I wouldn't say it was a good option. If they really know that they want biological children. There's obviously adopting, fostering, all these other options. So obviously they require money and things like that. So it's not open to everyone, but it seems like it could be open to them because they seem like they're setting themselves up pretty well financially, right? But assuming they really want biological children, you want to preserve fertility. So with that in mind, a vasectomy is not a great option. I totally respect what he said about not wanting to be a lab rat in terms of the trials for male birth control. At the end of the day, we need people who volunteer for these trials. Like, that's how we get things that are effective. So it's important, but I understand the fear. But we do need people who are brave enough to sign up. So I don't want to discourage people, but I understand where Johnny's coming from with that, right? So then moving on to the hormonal options, which would be the pill, the patch, or the implant, or the hormonal IUD. Being that Amy has anemia, those are solid options for her because it would help regulate her cycle, which absolutely would help with anemia. Good options for her. However, I totally understand not wanting to partake in hormonal birth control because there are a lot of side effects. Any woman can attest. We probably have any number of friends, or we've experienced it ourselves, that have had negative reactions to birth control. So I 100% respect her being like, I don't want to do it. Like, yes, it's an option, but I really would prefer not to. Makes sense. Totally understandable. We're not going to go into it. Do your research if you want to know all the side effects. There's a lot. But one thing I did want to note from the conversation of preserving fertility, we spoke about that for Johnny, so let's speak about it for Amy. You're actually not supposed to be on birth control for more than 2 years in a row. After you do that, you can potentially affect your long-term fertility, okay? So typically you would take a break. Now, you can go back on it after, as I understand it, but I think really the cap is 2 years before it could start affecting your fertility. Definitely 2 years back to back, but I think it's just 2 years overall. Look into that. So there's a lot of people, I'm sorry, I wear glasses, so I was about to like push them up and I didn't even have them on. So for those of you who are on hormonal birth control, something to look into if you want to preserve fertility. Now, some people, they don't want kids, or they're like, okay, if by the time they get to having kids, it's just not possible. Like, that's okay for them. That's a different journey, and I totally respect it. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say about that. And then for the non-hormonal IUD, which is the last like very effective non-hormonal method, and we'll get into less effective non-hormonal methods, right? That is known to make your flow heavier and also more painful, right? So she'd be introducing more pain into her life, but also a heavier flow, which is not good for someone who is anemic. So I would venture to guess that it's not an option. That's why she's mentioned hormones, because I believe that would be the only option that would work for her because of her condition. Again, not a doctor, but that's how I understand the information that I've received. Okay, so that's everything covered. The last options would be obviously condoms, which we've already covered, and that the other options would be cycle tracking. There's a term for it, and I forget what the term is, but when you track your cycles, you figure out which days are your lowest fertility, and you would only partake during those times to like, drop your chances, because there's only like a few days a month where it's like really, really high probability of you actually having conception. So, I think that can be up to like 75% effective. So, like nothing to sneeze at, but not that great if you really are like paranoid in the way that Johnny seems to be, right? So that's an option, cycle tracking. And then last would be pulling out, which we know is like not that effective, but it does exist. So for Johnny and Amy, I would recommend that they triple up, right? Like Johnny doesn't feel like condoms are enough. I would say you'd use condoms, cycle tracking, and pulling out. I think that could be enough, right? And that would preserve fertility long term for both of them, considering they're not ready to have children in the next 5 years. And most methods would potentially affect their long term fertility, right? Especially as they get older. It gets harder to have kids when you get older as well. So you're just you're stacking risk, right? So I would recommend for them that they go the non-hormonal route and they just double up or triple up. So that's what I would recommend. And honestly, if Johnny is so paranoid, like, I know this is crazy to say, but abstinence. That's the only thing that's 100% effective. If he's really that paranoid, abstinence. I don't believe that. I'm not really sure whether terminating pregnancy is even allowed in the state that they're in because the Supreme Court repealed stuff. I'm not sure. But I don't know if that's an option there, but it seems like they were having a conversation about whether that would be an option and it was cut out because it's a very hot button issue in the States right now. So I would say, for those, I've seen a lot of people, I watch some people who review stuff that are Canadian, like, we don't have, the same reproductive rights that we used to have. Um, so that's definitely a worry for people. But then a lot of people just don't believe in that being an option. And it seems like Amy doesn't believe in that being an option, whether she doesn't believe in it for herself or just like in general. It seems like they cut that out because, again, it's a hot button issue. And like the way people get dragged online for the littlest things, I think the producers were trying to protect them. And so that conversation that we're having at Amy's apartment, it was very choppy. And I think that's because they edited out those like more vulnerable things. So it seems like Johnny would be okay with it. It seems like Amy wouldn't. But because, it just wouldn't be on the table because they're not in accordance together with that, they would have to do everything they can to just not become pregnant versus using, like terminating a pregnancy as your last line of defense, if that makes sense. So assuming like that's not an option, so I would say triple up. But if it's really that scary, the prospect of having a kid before you're ready, abstinence is the only way to 100% assure that. I know that's crazy to think about in a marriage, but if it's really that scary, then that option always exists. It's only 5 years in the span of a lifetime. It's doable. But yeah, I would say at the end of the day, I think Johnny's someone who's paranoid. I think it should be on Johnny to figure out what that's going to be. And it should be on Johnny to wrap it up amongst other methods. And I hope that's what's happening and that he's not just trying to like play chicken with her so that he doesn't have to wrap it up. But that's really and truly their business. But I just wanted to come on here and just have a conversation about how these different methods can affect you and your fertility, because I think this information is not necessarily that widely known. Again, ask your doctor, like, especially in terms of being on hormonal birth control for more than 1 or 2 years. It's something that I learned in my reproductive health class in college. If it's incorrect, I'm so sorry, but like that is what I learned. And it stuck with me because it was so jarring, and I was like, I don't think anyone knows this. Because in my experience here in this country, like, I don't feel like doctors always correctly explain to you the side effects of prescribing certain things. Like, I mean, I personally have never taken hormonal birth control, but I just feel like whenever there's been other medications or anything, they're just like, oh yeah, you can just do this. And it's just like, why are you treating it so trivially? Like, this could have long-term effects, and I don't feel like those conversations are had too much. And it's unfortunate. So, I mean, that's just my experience. Like, I haven't seen every doctor in this country, and so I don't want to like badmouth people who are working really hard and very like overworked with like COVID and all these things. Like they go through a lot to be able to do what they do, and a lot of them are great, but some of them I think they don't always like share the knowledge that they themselves have, and I'm sure there's many reasons for that. But I think that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for rocking with me. I know this was a heavier conversation. I don't necessarily intend to be having a ton of these types of conversations on my channel, but I did want to say something because I saw like a lot of confusion around the conversation. And to be clear, like the education system in the US in terms of like this kind of stuff is like not that great. Like, it's not consistent that you will get this type of education. A lot of times you'll just be told like, wait till you're married, and that's kind of all the info. And obviously, not a lot of people are actually doing that, so people are ending up in compromising positions. So that's unfortunate. So maybe some elements that are confusing to those watching it about the way that Johnny and Amy were having a conversation could be due to the fact that the education system on these issues is just not consistently good. Not saying nowhere is it good. If you've experienced a really comprehensive one, that's amazing. But it's not consistent. Knowledge is power. That's really all I'm saying. Knowledge is power. Like whether it is that you have a belief that it should wait until marriage, and that's I respect that journey. It's a very hard journey, but can be a very rewarding journey for people, right? But for those who will intend to and not make it, for those who don't intend to because they're just not raised that way, things happen, and it's important to know how to protect yourself and how to protect others. You know, like I do think that it's a kind of loving thing to know, like, this is how I keep myself safe and keep my partner safe. So I'm not saying that we should be encouraging young people. The older I get, the older I get, I'm in my 20s, but the older I get, the more I'm like, oh, I was such a baby when I thought I knew everything. So I'm not encouraging teenagers to, and if you look at the stats, a lot of teenagers aren't. But the ones who aren't necessarily informed, and so that's why you're getting a lot of the issues that we have here. So many of your kids, whether you educate them or not, aren't actually ready, and they won't be doing those things. Just give them the information though, because it sticks. All of this that I just spoke about is all from education that I had in school, and it stuck with me. So I'm so blessed that I got that information, and it did not encourage me to like go wild. It's just I have the information so that I know what my options are and I know how to protect myself. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to me chat, ramble, rant, waffle, whatever else.